Well, hello again, friends, and welcome to this week's episode of Bigfoot for Breakfast, home of the mysterious and the macabre, where we sit in the studio every week, challenging conventional thought. We are your hosts, Sarah Jones
and Samantha Carter.
We're happy to be back again this week to bring you guys yet another weird episode, and much like all of you, we're ready to see the end of this political stuff for a while, and we're really happy to be talking about something else for a minute. Anything else.
Literally anything.
Even if it is super weird.
That's what we specialize in.
Yeah, and this week it is pretty weird. We have to remind everyone to please make sure that you subscribe to the show so that you can easily see when we update our episodes every week, because we wouldn't want any of you to miss out on this studio gold that we're bringing you. And if you're really feeling generous, please leave us a rating and a review. We really appreciate hearing what you guys have to say, and this helps out our show a whole bunch. Don't forget to tell a friend or anyone who has the ability to hear a podcast, even if they aren't your friend, because word of mouth seems to be one of the best ways to spread the word about a show like ours. So if you think of even one person who might like the show, please let them know about it. Or, just share it on your social media 2 or 3 times a day, something like that.
If you feel that you would like to contact us for any reason, a show suggestion, a compliment, complaint, or if you want to chime in and share a story with us, we happen to be requesting those right now. We're looking for any creepy stories that our listeners want to send our way that pertains to the paranormal, UFOs, abduction stories, cryptids, disappearances, anything of a creepy nature, really. We want to hear them and share them on a future episode, so please let us know if you're interested in this, and we will set up a short meeting with you to tell your story. If you don't particularly want to tell your story in an interview type format, you can always send us an email, message us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and you can leave a voicemail for us at 641-812-2635 at your convenience. The number is strictly a voicemail number, so you don't have to worry about it ringing to anyone here at BF for B. Only problem with that is that the voicemail will cut you off at 3 minutes, so some people just call right back and finish their story up if they need to, and we can put it all together here at the show, no problem.
Okay, so we want to do a quick shout out to a few people who have sent in messages. First, we want to give a huge shout out to Abel from the Iron Realm podcast, who sent us a message asking us to do a Bigfoot episode, since we have yet to do one. We actually do have a Bigfoot episode in the works, so Abel, stay tuned. We're going to get that done for you, and thank you so much for your message and for your suggestion.
Next up, we want to say hey to Jackie from British Columbia. She sent in a message, and it says, quote, "I'm from a tiny town in BC, and I think your show is awesome. Not only are the topics interesting, but the way you guys deliver the material is original, entertaining, and informative. You make my drive to work actually really fun. I can't wait to listen to the reptilian episode. I've read up so much about that topic. I hope you continue this podcast for a very long time. Have a great day." End quote. So we want to say thank you so much to Jackie for the encouragement, and we're so glad that you like the show. We have no plans to stop, so you should have plenty of entertainment coming up from us for quite a while.
Next up, we have Helena, who sent us a message through Facebook with a fantastic episode suggestion that we will most definitely be looking into, and I will go ahead and guarantee that there will be an upcoming episode on that. Helena has been listening all the way from Poland, and that is super cool. We really appreciate you letting us know that you like the show, and we always love suggestions. So we appreciate that tremendously, and thank you so much, Helena.
Also, we really appreciate that after you send us the really creepy and macabre story suggestion, you sent us a puppy picture to follow up and make us happy.
Yes, because we love puppies.
A listener named Ryan sent a message that was super interesting as well. He said for us to go back to an episode that we did a while back called The Government and listen to what we were talking about at the 40-minute mark. At this point, we were talking about a prediction being made that seems actually to be ringing true in the world today. We did that. And Ryan, you're totally right. So any listeners, if you're interested, go back to that episode, The Government, and give it a listen, the whole thing, but most especially at the 40-minute mark, and let us know what you think and if you agree. Thank you, Ryan, for your message. Very cool. Kinda.
Next, we want to give a big old giant shout out to a guy named Daniel. So Daniel has been messaging us regarding our Kelly Hopkinsville episode, and his correspondence has been crazy interesting. Daniel's grandfather was actually around this area area at the time and remembers these events, which is amazing. So Daniel has spoken to his grandfather about this, and we're not going to get too much into that here, but we do have a plan to keep speaking to Daniel, and we will have some follow-up information for you all about that here pretty soon. Also, Daniel has become a Patreon member, so we want to say thank you so much to him, and that he will be getting a Bigfoot for Breakfast t-shirt, a sticker, and some other perks soon. We appreciate this so much. If anyone else is interested in supporting the show through Patreon, just go to Patreon, search the show, and make a donation for some of the perks that we offer there.
Our last shout out is something that we need to address lately too. We received a pretty negative review as well on Apple Podcasts, and it's really crazy because we had just been talking about some of the things that this person addressed. There are a lot of people who do enjoy some of our joking here on the show, but we also realize that in some of the episodes it does kind of go a little too far. So we will do our best to keep the banter going, but maybe keep it a little more limited for those who are really just here for the information. We do totally get it. Please remember that it is kind of hard to keep everyone happy here, but we do truly read your suggestions and do our best to keep the show good for everyone. We appreciate the suggestions that you send us, whether they're good or bad, and use every bad review as constructive criticism.
Okay, so now to the issue at hand here, because we know that you're all biting your nails, just waiting to hear us tell you all about it. We'll start the show off today with a definition. The meaning of our subject today is pretty simple and it's to the point. Doppelganger, the apparition or double of a living person. This is from the Oxford Dictionary, and I may be reading too much into this because we tend to do that sometimes here at Bigfoot for Breakfast, but I happen to notice something in this particular definition. The dictionary refers to this as a possible apparition, but then goes on to say, or a double of a living person, not another living person who appears to be a double, but a literal double of a person. Doppelganger is a German word, and other terms that are used interchangeably are double-goer and double-walker. Another definition for doppelganger is, quote, the ghostly counterpart of a living person, which has obvious paranormal implications, which isn't at all surprising since nothing about seeing a direct mirror image of yourself can be considered natural.
The idea has always disturbed us, and we were pretty sure that it disturbs most people out there because the portrayal of the doppelganger in writings, movies, and videos throughout the world, its various cultures give the idea of seeing your replica or the replica of another person a very negative connotation. It's not a good vibe.
No, it would not be a good vibe.
The world doesn't need more than one of me.
No,
Ugh.
that's true.
And we'll get into all of that by the end of the episode, but we want to start off with a story from way back in the day, because this is absolutely not a new concept.
We're going clear back to 1845 France to tell you the story of Miss Emile Sagee. This story has been told over and over again since this time, but most of the stories seem to have been sourced from a book that was published in 1860. It was written by a man named Robert Dale Owens, who is an interesting guy all in his own right. The book is called Footfalls on the Boundary of Another World. Supposedly, he heard the story from one of Emily's students. Her name was Julie von Goldenstub. The story is really interesting because unlike many other unbelievable tales, this is an event that didn't seem to have happened just one time. It went on for a period of months, over and over again, and it was witnessed by numerous people. Emily was 32 years old, and she was a school teacher at a French private school for girls in Latvia, the name of which we cannot pronounce. Emily's teaching time at the school was really pleasant for everyone in a lot of ways because she was such a likable person and by all accounts a very, very good teacher. A patient person whose life was turned upside down by one of the weirdest experiences that we've ever heard of.
It kind of started out subtly with Emily's students being confused by her sudden appearance in one place when they were sure that she was in another. They were constantly reporting this, but it wasn't really taken too seriously at first, of course. But then one day, while Emily was standing with her back toward her students, she was writing their lesson on the chalkboard. Something absolutely crazy happened. All of a sudden, right next to Emily appeared a second version of her as concrete as the first, and this image of Emily was emulating her exactly. As she wrote on the chalkboard, apparently completely unaware of what her students were seeing, the other Emily wrote as well using the exact same movement at the exact same millisecond as if it were a mirror image, except it wasn't mirrored. The only difference in the two is that the original Emily had a piece of chalk in her hand and she was actually writing on the board like normal. The other merely emulated her gestures. although precisely there appeared to be no chalk in her hand and she wasn't writing anything. The students sat in their chairs completely astonished for a moment before the entire class erupted in horrified screams of confusion.
Obviously, the sound of the yelling girls caught the attention of other teachers in the surrounding classrooms, and they came rushing to Emily's room to see what was going on. And the girls all started trying to yell at once what had just happened, as Emily stood in the front of the classroom, appearing to be very confused herself at what caused the commotion. Once things had calmed down and the story of what had happened was obtained from each of the 13 girls in the room, it was surprisingly noted that every single one of them agreed on what happened and what they saw. The rest of the day seemed to go on as normal, but as the days went on, and so did the weeks, more and more of these strange appearances seemed to have occurred and were becoming more and more frequent.
One day, Emily accompanied one of her students to a place we also can't pronounce. They were walking along and suddenly the student dropped onto the sidewalk, seeming to have fainted. Once she came around, she told a concerned Emily and the others who were tending to her that as she was walking in front of her teacher, she caught a glimpse of her in a window, and there were two of her, one walking in front of the other, exactly the same. It scared her so badly that she just passed out from fear.
Emily was sitting at her desk and she was eating her lunch along with all of her other students, when the girls looked up and saw that Emily's double had appeared again, and this time was standing behind Emily as she sat in her chair eating her lunch. The figure stood upright behind her, emulating her exact movements as she ate, Emily holding silverware in her hands while the other had nothing. These occurrences within the classroom continued to happen, and over time her doppelganger would emulate her movements less and less, seeming to develop its own actions, although it never spoke out loud.
At one point, Emily got really sick with influenza, and another teacher and a friend of hers was sitting at her bedside visiting her. The other teacher witnessed Emily's body suddenly become very rigid in her bed, as though she was having a seizure. Panicked, the teacher started yelling and asking Emily if her illness was worsening. Emily did reply to her, telling her that she was okay, but her voice sounded weakened and very tired. The next thing her friend knew, she looked up only to see another version of Emily herself walking around her apartment while the Emily she knew lay in bed right before her eyes. She didn't want to alarm Emily in her sickened state, so despite her horror, she didn't say anything, but she got up and walked downstairs and told the other visitors what she had just seen. They had already heard these stories over and over again, and a few of the other teachers had already witnessed this for themselves, so they weren't really surprised. But what was remarkable was the fact that the second figure of Emily seemed to be becoming more and more independent from her. When it was first noticed by the students in her classroom, it emulated her movements and slowly begun to branch off and do its own thing. This time, her doppelganger was literally doing everything completely separate from her.
Another time, a group of students sat in a sewing class within the school. Right outside of the classroom in which they all sat was the school's garden, and there was a big picture window in the room overlooking it, so they could see everything that was going on out there and what the students outside were working on. They could see that Emily and some of the girls were outside doing some garden work. Another teacher sat in the classroom overlooking the work of the girls while they were learning to sew. The teacher stood up and suddenly left the room, needing to quickly attend to something else for the moment. The girls went about their work as they were instructed until the other teacher came back. Only, it wasn't the other teacher who came back into the room. It was Emile Sagee. She walked into the room and sat down silently in the chair at the head of the table where the previous teacher had been sitting. Only the real Emily could still be clearly seen going about her business in the garden as she was before. This was the imposter. The students who witnessed this also made note that while Emily's doppelganger had been present in the room with them, the real Emily in the garden appeared to suddenly become ill. She was moving with very obviously slow action, as if she suddenly had become very weak and tired. The second Emily who sat in the chair still resembled Emily in mannerism as she sat there smiling at them. A couple of schoolgirls decided to get crazy and walk up to the doppelganger to touch it. But as they reached out to do so, their hands were met with resistance that felt like a thick fabric of some sort. The doppelganger sat there smiling as though everything was normal.
People at the school got kind of curious about this phenomenon the more it happened, and this time, someone had asked Emily about her time in the garden. They asked her if she had felt anything peculiar at this time or had any weird or specific feelings. She remembered feeling really tired and looking through the window noticing that the teacher had left her seat and that it was empty. She wished that she could be inside with the girls who were learning how to sew because she felt that the girls wouldn't stay focused on what they were supposed to be learning if they were left unattended like that. That's the only thing she remembered. So it was like the second Emily just appeared to be doing exactly what the original Emily wanted to be doing, which is really weird.
As time went on and these sightings of Emily's doppelganger occurred more and more frequently, the slow and sluggish illness that seemed to overtake her while it was present got a little worse every time. It seemed that as the doppelganger became more and more independent and active, it would drain her of her life energy, and then as it would fade, the real Emily would appear well again. It was said that Emily never could see her double, while others would claim it would be right there with her. She only even knew it was there by the reactions of other people. She stayed at the school for 18 months before parents started to complain about the fear that the situation was instilling in some of the girls that she taught. As the girls went home to their families for the holidays, many of them didn't come back, and the administration of the school knew that this was because of the odd goings-on that surrounded their dear teacher, Emile Sagee. Pretty soon, the number of enrolled girls at the boarding school kept going down until they only had 12 students of the 42 that had started the year. The school couldn't afford to lose its students, so sadly, they were forced to ask her to leave.
Upon hearing the news of her dismissal, she cried out, the 19th time! It's too much to bear! It turns out that this was the 19th school at which Emily had taken a job, and this had happened at each one of the previous 18. She was such a likable and hardworking person, not to mention a talented and good teacher, that each school had been very sad to let her go and agreed to give her a good reference for her next job. She had been forced to move around farther and farther from her home in order to keep teaching, which was the only thing that she knew how to do, and her livelihood completely depended on this skill set. She just kept moving, hoping that the next place would work out.
She moved in with her sister after leaving this school, but she was unable to stay there as her nieces and nephews were also able to see her double and always referred to the two Aunt Emilys. It's not clear what happened to Emily after that or where she went, but it definitely seems to have been something that took an incredible toll in the direction of her life.
Doppelgangers are a complicated idea, and this is one of the most retold stories when it comes to doppelgangers ever. So we have to get started with the root of it all, of course. What is a doppelganger? We've already discussed them by definition, but there are a lot of theories floating around out there that we think are for sure worth discussing. One theory of the existence of the doppelganger is really similar to the one that we discussed in the episodes that we did last year about shadow people. Some say that this is the shadow self, and that every person and creature has one. This theory states that a person who sees their doppelganger is the only person who can do so. No one else will see it, and this seems to ring false if we're using the Emile Sagee story that we just told you. It seemed more in that situation that everyone saw the doppelganger but her, which makes me wonder if there's a lot more to her story than this. Was it something else?
Being a woman striving to have a career during this time and the job itself likely being stressful, is it possible that Emily might have just had a high level of stress going on that would have caused the phenomenon? Some people speculate that it was simply mental illness, but her doppelganger was witnessed seemingly by everyone but her, like we said. Was it simply a projection of her doing things that she strongly wanted to be doing at the time? Who knows?
There are a lot of these theories out there related to the existence and incidence of sighted doppelgangers. No matter the difference in theories, almost all of them end with a pretty common, very dark idea. If you see your doppelganger, it is a sign of very ominous things to come. Some say death. Some others will say that it could be anything. Something very bad and very life-changing is about to happen to you or someone that you love. And this leads us to another well-known story. This seems to be a universal idea when it comes to seeing your true double.
You're listening to the Prescribed Films Podcast Network, home to hundreds of hours of free podcast entertainment. The shows on this network all have a common goal, providing you with the best discussions about movies and other forms of entertainment media. The PFPN hopes to fill your earholes with audio joy. Visit our website with links to all the other amazing shows at www.thepfpn.com. Thanks for listening.
The story of John Donne is exceptionally tragic. John Donne was a poet back in the 16th century. One day he was strangely visited by a creature who happened to be an exact replica of his wife. So this wasn't a story of a person who just saw himself, but he saw someone close to him. The doppelganger was holding a baby that appeared to have been just born. She looked extremely sad, clutching her baby. The apparition gave the feeling of tremendous despair. The thing is, his wife was actually pregnant at that time. A few days later, John Donne's wife gave birth to a beautiful baby, but quickly found out that the baby was stillborn.
Another theory regarding this creepy situation is that of bilocation. So bilocation is actually a psychic ability, kind of like astral projection, like we talked about in the Project Stargate episode. In this situation, the doppelganger is sent out on purpose, and in this situation, it is referred to as a wraith. It is 100% an exact replica of the person who is sending them out into the world with their psychic mind, and is even able to interact with others using the person's exact mannerisms. They are completely indistinguishable from their person. So is it possible that they're using this unintentionally and not knowing that they have this ability?
Yeah, kind of. We're getting ready to tell a story.
Oh, okay.
Similar to that, but yeah, I think so. And speaking of unexplainable doppelganger events in which this theory of bilocation may apply, here's another one that we found to be absolutely insane and super interesting. In 1622, there was a lady named Sister Mary of Jesus in Agreda, Spain, who would often fall into some sort of trance as described by her friends and colleagues. She would go completely catatonic. After she would come out of the episode, she would tell people around her about what she saw during those times. She would talk about having extremely realistic dreams in which she walked through a wild land and encountered other people. She taught them the gospel and gave super detailed descriptions of her surroundings and of these people. She described exactly what they look like, their clothing, their rituals and customs, and tons of other things because in this dream world, she interacted with them very frequently and taught them lots of things, passing on her knowledge of Jesus Christ. She talked about how they spoke a language that was completely foreign to her, and she to them, but somehow everyone was understood and a great deal was learned from one another.
Later, it was discovered that by her detailed descriptions of the people in the location, she was describing exactly the Germano Indians. This is crazy because this group of Indians had only just been discovered in an entirely different part of the world. This was the 1600s, so there was no possible way that she could have even known about them at this point. Yet she described everything completely perfectly. During the time of their discovery in what is now New Mexico, one of the people to initially interact with them described something super weird as well. A man named Father Alonso de Benavides reported that when the Germano Indians were first discovered, having never ever met a Spaniard and having come from almost total isolation, they appeared to be extremely familiar with Roman Catholic rituals. There was no way that this could be. They were even familiar with Catholic liturgy and were speaking it in their own native tongue. So eventually, after they came to a point in which they could understand one another, the Catholic people asked the Germano Indians how they knew all of these things, not only knew them, but practiced them with insane familiarity. The natives responded that for years they had been visited by the spirit of a woman in blue. They told Father Benavides that she had spent a great amount of time among their people, teaching them about her religion, and they subsequently adopted her ways and were converted.
In 1846, Dostoevsky wrote a fictional story called The Double, in which a clerk's slow descent into madness because he just can't seem to get out of poverty and is experiencing a terrible situation of unrequited love. During his period of mental instability, he sees his doppelganger. The doppelganger was exactly himself, with only one difference. He was great at everything. He was successful, he was driven and positive, everything that his original wasn't. The clerk didn't like the new him being around. Obviously, he saw the danger in a brighter, better, more positive physical version of himself occupying his space. Dostoevsky wrote regarding the clerk's feelings of being tossed aside like an old rag. Quote, "He would have been a rag and not the clerk. Yes, a nasty, filthy rag. But that rag would not have been a simple rag. It would have been a rag possessed of dignity. It would have been a rag possessed of feelings and sentiments." End quote. Eventually, the doppelganger killed the original clerk and went on living his life as him. I wanted to throw in this fictional account because we see the idea of the doppelganger pop up in various places throughout culture and entertainment, and this idea of possibly being replaced in your life seems to be the prominent idea of fear. Is this the common fear when people think of seeing a doppelganger of themselves? I know that would be mine. If I saw that, I think my first question would be why? Why are they here? Obviously, it can't be a good thing. They are either here as a sign of really bad things to come, or I'm out and they're in. I know it would make me feel incredibly uneasy in a totally unnatural situation like this.
Even one of our great United States presidents had an experience in which his doppelganger appeared to him. President Abraham Lincoln was just elected to office. Later that night, he went home, tired from the excitement of the day. He looked in the mirror only to see two of himself staring directly back at him. The quote recorded from Abe Lincoln himself regarding this incident is this. Quote, looking in that glass, I saw myself reflected nearly at full length, but my face, I noticed, had two separate and distinct images. This tip of the nose of one being around 3 inches from the tip of the other. It was a little bothered, but the illusion vanished. On lying down again, I saw it a second time, plainer, if possible, than before. And then I noticed that one of the faces was a little paler, say 5 shades, than the other. End quote. This quote comes from a book called Washington in Lincoln's Time by Noah Brooke. Lincoln told his wife about what happened, and she was incredibly bothered by this. She immediately took it as a bad sign, and it is said that her interpretation of what her husband saw was that of tragedy. She took his double reflection to mean that Lincoln would serve 2 terms as president of the United States. So far, this is great news, but the fact that his second image was gaunt, pale, and sick-looking led his wife to think that sometime in his second term, Honest Abe would die. This, of course, is a prediction that turned out to be correct, as we all know. I was trying to tell him to not try to end the Fed.
Yeah.
Don't do it.
Even Catherine the Great had an experience with a doppelganger. One morning while she slept in her bed, all of her servants came running into the room, frantically yelling. Come to find out, they had just seen her, plain as day, sitting in the throne room, but they all knew full well that she was in her room asleep. They quickly told Catherine about it, and she hurriedly dressed to go out into the throne room and see this for herself. She probably expected whatever it was to be gone by the time she got there, but lo and behold, she reached the throne room, and there it was, her exact double sitting there in her throne. Immediately, Catherine ordered the workers of the house to shoot the intruder and walked out of the room. There isn't many details from there as to what happened to the doppelganger, but it wasn't even a week later that Catherine the Great passed away from a stroke.
Another theory is that the doppelganger comes in peace, which is something that I would never likely feel if I saw my own, but we'll entertain it. It is thought that it comes to its original person as a guide to provide needed advice in a time of need or stress. Others say that they come during these times in order to disguise themselves as being helpful, but they are really just an evil entity that is there to plant seeds in the person's mind in order to confuse them or make them feel crazy.
In the incident of Guy de Maupassant, a Frenchman writer used to talk about seeing his doppelganger all the time. He would hang out with him, interact with him, bounce ideas off of him, and all those things. Maupassant wrote a story called The Horla. He had claimed that his doppelganger one day sat down at his desk and began telling a story. So Maupassant wrote it down. The doppelganger dictated the story out loud, and it was eventually published. The story was about a man who was haunted by an evil spirit who was intentionally deteriorating his mental health. Coincidentally, Maupassant's mental health did decline, and he ended up being taken away to an insane asylum where he passed away a year later.
So was the mental health issue the reason for Maupassant seeing his doppelganger in the first place, or was the doppelganger the reason for his decline in mental health? Well, theories go either way on this one.
So obviously, there are different interpretations and usage of the word doppelganger. We hear people say all the time, hey, I saw your doppelganger today. And typically, this obviously just means that they simply saw someone who bore a striking resemblance to you. In the paranormal context, this isn't the same thing. There are stories in which people find others who look just like them, pose for pictures with them, and all that jazz. Then there are other stories in which people deeply felt that upon seeing their other, that this was an extremely ominous and unnatural experience. That they had an innate feeling that this wasn't simply another person with physical characteristics that strongly resembled their own, but it somehow was them. in a sense. People generally have a strong natural fight or flight response, and often their intuition will lead them to know whether something is off.
There are some mystical thinkers who see the doppelganger as a sort of demonic entity. Demons are known to trick people and play psychological tricks on their prey. They are said to shapeshift as well, and have been thought to be the source of this phenomenon that people have experienced when seeing themselves unexpectedly. Some others say that this view of a doppelganger is outdated due to the lack of other major correlations to a demonic presence. It is thought that people used to deduce that the doppelganger was actually a demon simply because they lacked any other explanation, and theories of old so commonly jumped to the demon theory to explain away just about anything that they didn't have a good answer for, like the diabetes.
The diabetes. Either way, it's obvious that the impression that the vast majority we'll try vast majority of experiencers get an extremely negative feeling out of this, and it's probably in a person's best interest to leave them be if they are seen. The general consensus in the expert community, if there is one, is that they aren't really to be trusted. Some have the belief that the entity is seen as sort of an evil twin, and it's out to disrupt your life in some way. They give bad advice and maliciously plant seeds of doubt and jealousy in your mind. Direct reference to this idea can be found within the religion of Zoroastrianism. In the cosmological model of the religion, there are two twins, Ahura and Angra. They are basically personified representatives of good and evil.
I don't know if you remember, but we did mention in our exorcism episode that one follower of this specific religion was Freddie Mercury.
Yeah, I remembered that. I was pretty proud of myself. I knew I'd heard of this.
We put him on a very high pedestal because he knew the truth about us.
Yeah.
Fat bottom girls make the rockin' world go round.
Yep, they do.
Anyway, Native Americans often thought that a doppelganger was simply like an evil twin. There is an upper world and an underworld, and the evil twins live in the underworld while you, the original, in the upper. The Hopi have a mirror effect-like belief within this idea. They believe that whatever is going on in the upper world, the very opposite is happening in real time in the underworld. So when you encounter each other, it's like a thinning of the veil, or...
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, basically. So within this realm of strangeness, there is a voice of reason. And we read about him in a Vice article called The Time When You're Most Likely to See Your Doppelganger. We hate this because it's simply not as fun. But we must present this theory because there are so many people out there in the world who love a reasonable and scientific explanation for things, and we must respect that. This man's name is Christopher French, and he is a professor and an anomalistic psychologist. So Professor French puts forward his first theory that the majority of these doppelganger experiences are those resulting from mental illness. Schizophrenia is a big one, but not only mental illness can cause this. He also gives some examples of physical ailments that could lead to an experience like this. Brain tumors and epilepsy are big ones. This experience is known as autoscopy. By definition, autoscopy is basically a hallucination of a version of themselves or of other people. In other words, it's a symptom of something that is plaguing the experiencer, whether it be a mental illness or a physical one.
So Professor French is put to the test, and he is asked by paranormal researcher Lee Roberts why the vast majority of doppelganger experiences are reported by generally healthy 20 to 40-year-olds. His response is that this makes total sense. The age group is most likely in the term of life in which they would be experiencing the most stress. This is a time in people's lives when they would be starting a family, trying to pay off mortgages, and taking on other loans, putting them in increased situations of financial hardship, trying to climb the career ladder, maybe dealing with a relationship that is troublesome, and they're often not getting enough sleep and possibly taking recreational drugs or drinking. Drinking. We'll blame the marijuana.
The marijuana.
Stop smoking the reefer, the devil's lettuce.
Riding the white pony. That's cocaine.
Booger sugar.
Ew. I never have heard that. That's gross.
And this is totally true. We're all doing cocaine at this age. I don't do the drugs. This is also the time in which symptoms of schizophrenia would be starting to present itself in a person if they had it. These burdens and stress on the mind often take a huge toll on people. There is no reason to believe that some symptoms of extreme stress wouldn't manifest in some unusual ways.
While this seems to us like an extremely sound theory, it doesn't exactly explain the whole host of people without ailment who experience this creepy occurrence. So what about the story of Emile Sagee that we told you earlier, in which she wasn't even the one that saw her own double? Instead, 42 female students saw it as well as a few other educators. And not just once, several times over the course of months. Professor French actually addresses this, and in this Vice article, he states that this is a prime example of something called memory conformity. This is basically the idea that one person thinks that they see something weird and they talk about it a whole bunch and talk about it so emphatically that other people start to believe that they saw it too. They take on the other person's memory as one of their own. He states that either memory conformity is the answer or that it was simply an elaborate prank pulled off by the students.
And they'll call it hysteria and blame it on our wandering uteruses, like all the other doctors.
Yep, it was the wandering uterus.
If the story of Emile Sagee is true as told, I'm not sure I buy this. These sightings happened for a long period of time, multiple times, and reportedly this was not the first school that she had to leave because of this problem. We're going to continue to go ahead and classify her experience and those of the students in the weird and creepy category that defies explanation, because in this instance, we just don't think that the good professor's argument is effective. But that's only our opinion.
Which is really important to us, right?
Yeah, because we're always right.
Mm-hmm. The idea of the doppelganger also existed in Norse mythology and was called a bardager. Their description of this anomaly is a little different than others. They believe that these entities are actually your ghost as it existed before you. So it's their belief that your spirit doppelganger is about one step ahead of you in your life. It appears everywhere that you will be. There are a lot of accounts that would go along with this representation. People frequently report creepy experiences in which they hear, see, or somehow experience a person shortly before they physically arrive at a place.
So maybe Emily's was her teaching her class in the future, doing the same lesson?
I don't know.
To a class later on?
The fact that they talked about it emulating her exact movements, I don't know.
But if you were teaching that exact lesson, you'd write the exact same thing.
Yeah, maybe that's what it is. Maybe
I don't know.
Maybe it fits. It kind of fits.
It could. The ancient Egyptians also had their ideas and thoughts about doppelgangers. I still find it so incredibly interesting that so many cultures that had no communication with each other whatsoever from completely opposite ends of the globe all had theories on the same phenomenon.
And, this is dating back, our earliest story was 1600s. So, it's not like this is a new concept, peeps.
Also, it's a real cool word.
Doppelganger.
Vertiger.
Oh, yeah, that too.
The ancient Egyptians believed that everyone was born with a spiritual double called a ka. They thought that if a person passed away, the person's double would then die as well, and the person would not get a chance to live their eternal life after death. Well, that sucks. So much negativity. The Egyptians are thought to have mummified people after their passing for this very reason. They thought that the person's ka would remain inside their body if they could keep it from decomposing, and that the person could continue to live on after their passing.
Right? Seems reasonable.
Yeah.
A man named Brian Greene, a physicist from Columbia University, wrote a book called The Hidden Reality, Parallel Universe, and the Deep Laws of the Cosmos. He had a theory that the doppelgangers that we see are simply those who have come through the alternate universe that we are all living in. Everything going on in the world is being replicated in a dimension parallel to ours, and these entities that are essentially us bleed through once in a while, and we see them by accident.
Ugh, I got shivers when you said that, because speaking of us, I guess since we're talking about doppelgangers, if you haven't seen the newish Jordan Peele movie called Us, and you enjoy watching things that are absolutely horrifying, as we pointed out earlier, you definitely should watch it. It really makes a person think and is presented fantastically in true Jordan Peele fashion. In a Bustle article, a doctor named Pamela Rutledge analyzed this portrayal of the other self and said that the replication of the self innately, quote, undermines our sense of reality and who we are. This creates a disconnect about control. Are we controlling our actions and intentions, or what does that mean about the other? End quote. She goes on to talk about this portrayal of the doppelganger, and I think she hit the nail on the head as far as why this movie was so scary. Because he climbed up the tree with all fours. That's why. No, anyway.
Yeah. Sam was sitting on the couch when the little creature just scurried up the tree real quick out of nowhere, and there were so many expletives that came out of Sam's mouth. It was hilarious while we watched the movie with our young children.
They're not that young. She said that the idea of the doppelganger as portrayed in the movie Us is that the tethered are partially in control of the surface dweller's actions and vice versa. Do you say vice versa or do you say vice versa?
I say vice versa because I feel like vice versa just sounds dumb.
I hear a lot of people say it and it drives me nuts. Is it wrong or is it right? Who's right? Who's wrong?
We're right. They're wrong.
Okay. The similarity of a doppelganger means we feel especially vulnerable since if they are like us, then they know our patterns and weaknesses, giving them the advantage.
The Irish often refer to the doppelganger as the fetch. Stop trying to make fetch happen.
Dang it, that was my line. I was going to say it after you were done reading the whole thing.
This was a replica of a living person who cast no shadow, which is gross.
And it's not going to happen.
Oh yeah, fetch isn't going to happen.
There is a syndrome called Capgras syndrome, in which the sufferers feel that they are in a parallel universe and everyone that they know is a double. They will often take down all of the mirrors in their house and avoid them elsewhere because they feel their reflection is actually a doppelganger of themselves and will tend to find it incredibly disturbing. In an internet article written by Cliff Pickover, he states that, quote, when we dream, we sometimes have Capgras-like perceptions. For example, have you ever been in your home while in a dream, but it seems to be not quite right? Not really your home? Is your loved one not really your loved one? End quote. Imagine having an illness in which you felt like this all of the time throughout your daily life, always suspicious that things aren't quite right and people aren't who they seem to be. You know, when my daughter was just born, I used to have really strange dreams that I would be like holding her and we would be doing our daily routines and suddenly she was a kitten instead of a baby.
Oh,
really weird.
That just speaks volumes for your love of cats and hers.
Weird.
So we've gone into a few stories of the doppelganger incidents that have become popular over the years and that have been retold time and time again because they are, well, unbelievable. But we had to take to the ranker list to find a few stories that were submitted there by regular everyday folks who have experienced this level of weird in their lives. This one comes from a Redditor, and we don't really like to share usernames because, well, it's not our article and they didn't give us permission to use their name, real name or Reddit username, so we'll just tell the creepy story and leave it at that.
When I was 9, I stayed home sick from school.
You gonna do that the whole time?
I distinctly remember that I wasn't actually sick, simply playing hooky to avoid mean kids, as I did that a lot around that age. I woke up from a nap, turned on the TV in our living room, and scrolled through some channels when my, quote, mother suddenly leaned over the bar and stared at me without saying anything. I had been awake for a few moments at this point, so I can't rightly blame sleep paralysis for all of this. Now, whatever this thing was, it was entirely identical to my actual mother. It sounds weird to describe, but it's as if the only difference was that this thing pretending to be my mom had never felt a single emotion in its life. It was unsettling. It beckoned me, and I attempted to talk to her as I would my mother. She kept beckoning, refused to answer, and that's when I sensed something horribly wrong. The whole scenario felt disgustingly familiar, but I'll get into that later. Naturally, I started screaming at this thing to answer me. It just kept beckoning. I bolted, running out of the room and into the yard yelling for help. My mother, the real one, had been working in the yard and came rushing over. I told her what I'd just seen, and she soothed me with easy explanations that it must have been a fever dream, but thankfully stayed by my side the rest of the afternoon as I was a nervous wreck. Believe me, in our quest for information regarding the doppelganger, we read through tons of these stories from regular people who submitted to various websites and forums, and although the experiences differ in a lot of ways, there are some striking similarities in the majority of these stories. The overwhelmingly common theme is that many report the strange doppelganger didn't talk. Some were simply seen walking from one room to the other. Other doppelgangers approached people and only stared at them in a disconcerting and awkward manner, and still others would beckon to the people who saw them as though trying to get their attention.
The idea of seeing our exact self really messes, we think, with our innate sense of identity, and identity is really important to a human. It makes us feel in danger when we don't have it.
There really doesn't seem to be a one-size-fits-all answer for this phenomenon. Many of the theories that we've rattled off in this episode really do seem like a great explanation, but don't really fit in with all of the experiences. There's a large group of people who seem to simply see this as a type of glitch in the matrix situation, or a time slip type of event. And in my opinion, this seems to be the most reasonable with the vast majority of the experiences that we've read. But then there is the case of Emile Sagee and other situations in which the acknowledgement of a doppelganger seemed to bring about or seemed to be foreshadowing of horrible events to come or even death for the person being replicated. Why does the sighting of a true doppelganger seem to frighten us much more than it fascinates us? Is it really the idea of being replaced by someone so incredibly similar to yourself in not only physical characteristics, but in exactly replicated mannerisms? Where do they come from? Is it really a parallel universe and they're just bleeding through here and there by accident? Do they know about us, or are they just as surprised as we are when a rare crossover occurs? These are some things we may never know, but we will keep our eye out for new information and more creepy instances in which doppelgangers are involved.
But unfortunately for now, this is where we must end our episode for the week.
Parting is such sweet sorrow.
We have been very happy to be here once again, bringing in another creepy topic as Halloween creeps up on us. If you haven't already, please don't forget to subscribe to the show and leave us a rating and a review, because this really helps us out and we really appreciate them. Do you have a creepy doppelganger story to share with the class? If so, leave us a voicemail and tell us all about it. You can do this at 641-812-2635. And we don't only want to hear about doppelgangers. If you have any type of really weird, unexplained, or creepy story, go ahead and call it in. We want to hear about all of it. Paranormal experiences, UFOs, aliens, missing people, conspiracy, anything. We love to hear from you. Until next week.
Come at me, bro.